Shavua Tov, Mishnah Yomi starts the week in chapter 4 of Sanhedrin, Mishnayot 2 and 3. Now, in Mishnah Aleph, we started a list of ways that capital cases, Dinei Nefashot, are different from all other cases. Mishnah Bet picks up with that theme. Dinei Tumot v'Taharot, cases involving Tuma, ritual impurity, and Tahara, being Tahor, being pure, and of course other things like Kashrut, Serveheter would be included in this. Matchilin min hagadol, we let the greatest sage on the court speak first. But for Dinei Nefashot, capital cases, Matchilin min hatzad, we begin only from the side. Now, when they say the side, they mean the judges that are not the greatest in stature, but the least in stature or rank or tenure, because the oldest and wisest judge would sit in the middle, and the younger, less experienced judges would sit to the side. Now, the idea being, if the most senior and respected judge offers an opinion in a capital case, then people are going to be very reluctant to argue on him, and especially in capital cases, we want all of the arguments and all of the evidence and all of the ideas on the table so that we can clear up the case, and, if the man is really innocent, we really want him to be found innocent. So for Dinei Nefashot, for capital cases, it's better to have the least experienced judges offer their opinion first, so they won't be reluctant to offer arguments during the deliberations if somebody greater than them or wiser, older than them speaks first. Now this halacha comes up in the Gemara in Gittin, Daf 56, Daf Nu or No, which should be famous because this is the story of the destruction of the second temple. And recall there was a Kamsa and a Bar Kamsa, and there was a big quarrel, and Bar Kamsa was humiliated. The rabbis had been present, so he said he'll embarrass the rabbis. He'll go to the Romans, have the Romans bring a carbon, but he'll put a mum in that animal, in that offering that it came from the Romans, so the Jews won't offer it. So then he comes to the temple with this blemished offering, and the sages say, well, maybe we should offer it anyway so the Romans don't attack us. And Zechariah ben Avkulis says, no, people will say we can offer blemished animals on the Mizbeach. So that's not true halacha. So they said, so listen, so maybe we should have somebody, hit Bar Kamsa on the head pretty hard, and he won't go back and tell the Romans. And then Rabbi Zechariah ben Avkulis, he said, Yomru meitul mum bekochim yahareg. People will say that somebody's chayav death, he's liable to an execution if he puts a blemish in a carbon. And at this point, a much later sage, Rabbi Yochanan, explains, Anvanatznuto, Rabbi Zechariah ben Avkulis, hechrivu et beitenu, the anova, the humility of Zechariah ben Avkulis has destroyed our temple. It caused a lot of problems. Now, why his humility? Because some Mefarshim explain that Rabbi Zechariah ben Avkulis was actually the greatest, wisest, eldest sage there, and he spoke first. He spoke first, saying we shouldn't kill Bar Kamsa to protect the Jewish people from the slander to the Romans. But he was such an anav that he didn't realize he was the oldest and wisest and most respected, so he went ahead and spoke first in a Dinei Nefashot case, thinking he was not the greatest, and the other sages were reluctant to argue on him because they knew he was in fact the greatest. He was simply being humble. So getting back to our halacha, one of the big takeaways here is know who you are. If you're a Talmud and you're learning and you're in the process, so maybe you shouldn't speak up and step on the toes of people who are older and wiser, unless you really have to, it's really appropriate. And if you are older and wiser, you need to leave space sometimes for other people to share the limelight and to be able to express their ideas also. But critically, in any event, you have to know who you are and know your own worth. You have to have that self-awareness, not an exaggerated sense of humility. So that's Gittin, Daf 56. Now back to Mishnah Yomi in Sanhedrin. Hakol kasherin ladun dini mamonot. Anyone is kosher to be a judge in financial cases. We mentioned in the last chapter, someone could even accept shepherds who are not very wise in halacha. Ein hakol kasherin ladun dini nefashot. Not everybody can judge capital cases. Ele kohanim, Leviim, v'Yisraelim, hamisim lekahuna. So these mean the miyuchas, the Jews with good genealogy, with genealogical purity. We mentioned way back in Kiddushin that there are different genealogical categories in the Jewish people, and not all of them had the genealogical purity enough to marry into kahuna, that Kohanim could marry their daughters. So only the sort of mainstream, majority of the Jewish people who didn't have genealogical issues could serve as judges in capital cases. The Rav Bar Nura brings the explanation in the Gemara as to the biblical source for this. On the Mishnah Gimel, Sanhedrin, the actual court, the logistics, the layout of the court, Haita kechotzi gurin agula. It was shaped like half of a round threshing floor. So it was a semi-circle. Kedei shehu roin zeh et zeh. So all of the judges could see one another. Now a full circle, they could also all see one another, but remember they had the litigants would stand in the center, and all of the judges need to see the faces of the witnesses and litigants, whoever's speaking to them. Ushnei sofri adyanim omdim livnehem, and two scribes, court recorders, would stand before them. Echad miyamin, echad mismol, one to the right, one to the left of the whoever's speaking. V'kotvin divrei mizokin, divrei mechayvin, and they'd write down the words of those who are finding zchut, finding innocence, and the words of those who are finding chov, arguing for conviction. Rabbi Yehuda Omer Shlosha. Rabbi Yehuda says you need three court recorders, three scribes. Echad kotev divrei mezokin. One writes down the arguments for acquittal. Echad kotev divrei mechayvin. One writes down the arguments for guilt. Hashlishi kotev divrei mezokin divrei mechayvin. And the third scribe tries to write down everything. So we have an extra copy. It's very difficult for one scribe to write down or summarize everything that's going on. But if you have three of them, you're going to get the picture. You're going to have a written record available for the judges to review, make sure they've exhausted all of the arguments and figured out the truth of this case. Yashar Kochachem, Shvatov, Freilich, and Chanukah Sameach.